Well, good morning. Welcome to the Powerful Moments Sunday School class this morning. We're glad you are here. We're glad to be back. We were in Hilton Head a couple of weeks, had a good time, and then Wednesday of the second week we were there, Martha got the stomach virus, and then she's always nice to share, so then she shared it with me. And I got it Thursday, so it kind of delayed our return, so we got behind and missed the last Sunday as well. But thanks to Mark and Jeff for teaching. As always, I know they did a great job, so I appreciate that, and appreciate having such able and willing and excellent substitutes. So it makes me feel comfortable and makes me feel like we just leave again. So, but we had a good time, enjoyed it. So, all right. Nona was just telling me that she's scheduled for surgery a week from tomorrow. And Nona, I never did get a straight answer. Do we need to set up a meal train for you? Not at this point. I ask you after the surgery. Okay, so you'll be in our prayers then, and include that in the prayer book so that, include that in the prayer book so that people not here will see it in the email too, if you would. So, all right, other announcements. Linda, any update for you on surgery? And November the 13th for surgery for Linda. So, all right, keep her in the prayers that I think continues on schedule. She's ready to get that over with, I think. So, all right. What else this morning? Oh, trivia night is coming up again, November the 10th, or trivia afternoon, I guess you would say, 4 to 6, and similar format as last time. Bring snacks, and we'll divide up into teams and have some competition and have some amazing prizes, I know, for the winning team. So seemed to be a lot of fun last time. It's a church-wide event, so we divide up into teams of different ages and get to know some other people you may not know as well. So it was a good time last time, and it's coming back by popular demand, I guess you would say. So hopefully you'll plan to be here that afternoon of November the 10th. What else? Obviously backpack turn-in. Oh, they're gone. Backpack turn-in today is today. They're already gone. So there were quite a few up here. I didn't count them, so I don't know if we hit our goal or not. Jill Mike can tell us when she comes in. I think the goal was 50. Is that right, Stan? You know? I think she told me 50 backpacks. So, okay. Anything else? The church we go to in Hilton Head when we're there, it's a little small church, about 25 or 30 people is all that attends, and we're kind of young folks for them, so, but a lot of them, so. But anyway, they have a backpack program as well, so I think that's interesting, and they do it for their county association. So I forgot, Martha, you remember how many backpacks was their goal? Are you not? Association had the most backpacks in their association, and again, it's a teeny tiny church in terms of attendance. So, okay, anything else? Oh, here comes Jill. Jill, what was our goal for backpacks, and did we make it? Filled all 50. Yay! And we exceeded our goal for what's the fall goal? I forgot the name of it. What is it?
Golden State.
Golden State. Thank you. Couldn't think of that. Golden State offering. We exceeded. Our goal was $3,000, and I think we raised about $3,300. So that's great. That's for state missions. All right. Anything else? I've told you everything I can think of, I think. So, yeah, Mark. Okay, so Jonas is home, Mark says, and they did do a stint. Is that what you said? They're planning to do a stint the next near term, but home resting, doing well right now. So keep him in your prayers. Which reminded me of one other thing. Oh, Mark, tonight in men's Bible study is James, the brother of Jesus. So Mark does an excellent job for that. If you've not attended and you're a man, you probably would. Well, I don't know if you would go co-ed or not. But anyway, if you're a man, you ought to give him a try. He does a great job with the study. He's going through 12 unlikely heroes in the Bible. So it's a little bit discriminatory because I think there's 11 men and 1 woman in there. So 10 and 2. Okay, 10 and 2. So, but anyway, excellent study. Tonight is James. So if you can, plan to be there for that. So, all right. Anything else? Anybody like to lead? What's that, Jill? Well, thank you. Yes, I mentioned that as well. It's nice to have excellent substitutes. So, all right. Anybody like to lead us in opening prayer this morning? Amen. Thanks, Dan. So the title of our lesson today is Choices. It's from Mark chapter 15, verses 6 through 15. And we'll see today some choices that were made by people. But as I thought about this, we all make choices throughout our lives. We make some what are big, monumental, we might say, in our lives choices. We make little choices every day, but there are a lot of choices that we make. Some are hard choices, some are easy choices. But as you think about this, someone or some of you might want to share some choices that you made in your life and the results of that. As I thought about that, we'll let you share those choices in a minute if you'd like to. But as I thought about that, I thought of was a relatively hard choice, and that was my first job. I had a choice between 2 opportunities, I guess you'd say. One was to go to work with the Secret Service. And with that, I had just come back from basic training and what they call advanced individual training. I'm not sure how advanced it was, but anyway, advanced individual training. So I've been gone for 6 months or so from home. Martha and I were planned to be married that late summer. And so if I chose that option of Secret Service, that would mean that I can't remember how long, but I would go to Quantico Marine Base to train for the Secret Service for some weeks, months, whatever it was, time. So that was one option out there. The other option that was available was to go to work for a bank. So after thinking about that for a while and so forth, it seemed to be, I guess it came down to the decision of probably traveling a lot through our lives. Our families were here in Lebanon, and also being newlyweds and just getting through an experience of 6 months away, decided maybe the bank was a better option. And it turned out to be, in hindsight, probably the best option for me. So that was a hard choice at the time, though. But an easy choice, as I told you, we were about to get married in 2 or 3 months from that point time. We planned this, and that was an easy choice for me. It's so easy that on the afternoon of our wedding, Martha calls, and whoever answers says, he's taking a nap. I got to go wake him up. So, so I was pretty relaxed about that choice. So it's turned out to be the very best choice and an easy choice at that time. So we all face some hard choices and some easy choices. Anybody like to share a choice that you made and how it turned out? Kim, you got one right there on your mind? Yeah. Wow. What's that, Roger? She said it was the best one, best blessing. So, yeah. Yeah, Nona. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nona said she made the choice of selling her house in Nashville and moving to Lebanon how many years ago, Nona? 1992 she made that choice, and she says that was a good choice, so worked out well for her. Anybody else? Why don't you give her the mic, Martha? I don't have to report. Yes, you know. You can, well, they can't hear you over the online, whoever might be out there. And
okay, you've probably all heard this story, but some of you might be new. When Jamie and I were first married, and I was teaching elementary school PE, and I was pregnant with Josh, and I had no desire, I didn't think, to quit teaching school and be a stay-at-home mom. Well, the first minute I saw his face, I told Jamie, I can't do it. So we sold our 2-income house and built a 1-income house, which is totally big enough for a family of 3 or 4 or how many pets we have. But anyways, so that was the greatest decision. God just worked it all out, and we never looked back, never did without, and I think if you get your priorities right, God's going to bless you. And I'm not saying that just because I chose to be a stay-at-home mom. That's not for everybody. But it was great for us, and the Lord provided. So thankful for that. And I've never gone back. Well, I substitute now.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's great. And you got a big event day coming up here in a month or so. Yeah, her son's getting married in a little over a month, so big day. Anybody else? You're going to pass the. It's coming, Novella. Yeah. 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 Novella said for those online that she and Linda had made the choice. How long ago now has it been? What? Has it been that long? 3 years ago? Wow, doesn't seem like that long. Yeah, 3 years ago to make a church change and come here, and it's been a blessing to them, she said, and it's certainly been a blessing to us as well. So we're a good choice. We're glad they made that choice. All right, anybody else?
I had one also when I changed universities. And the second university I chose offered me a lot of extra benefits and opportunities, and it was a good move.
That is the university, the Middle Tennessee State University, right? Yeah. You were there yesterday? They didn't. They had a great day. They didn't play yesterday. That's the best day they can have because they're terrible. So, all right. Who else? Anybody else? Going. All right, gone. So, Sid, we're going to look at Mark chapter 15, verses 6 through 15. And this lesson that we're looking at today, these verses, it is an interval between the lesson last week, Mark chapter 15, verses 1 through 5, and this lesson. Between these two, Jesus had gone or went before Herod, who was the tetrarch or Roman placed ruler of Galilee. So that's occurred in the interim between our two lessons. It was covered in a different gospel. So this was the second phase. This time that he went to Herod was the second phase of their Jesus' secular or civil trial. Today we'll look at the third phase of Jesus' secular or civil trial. So Herod, when he went before Herod, Herod questioned Jesus extensively, but Jesus, his response was that, quote, he answered Herod nothing. So Jesus underwent significant abuse while standing trial before Herod. Herod eventually got through with Jesus. He dressed him in an expensive royal-looking robe, and he sends him back to Pilate. So Pilate sending Jesus to Herod was Pilate's first attempt to diffuse the situation with Jesus and what was going on, or you might say his first attempt to pass the buck. So interesting, it says in Luke chapter 23, verses 12, it says, and so Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, the day that Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. For previously, they had been enemies toward each other. So this old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, we see that playing out here between Herod and Pilate, where before they were enemies and now they become friends over the trial of Jesus. And I said this is the third and final phase of the civil or secular trial of Jesus. In earlier lessons we talked about the three phases of the religious trial of Jesus. So in today's lesson, we'll see a couple of choices being made. The crowd made a choice, and Pilate made a choice. We'll see in today's lesson. So with that, Martha, if you would read Mark chapter 15, verses 6 through 10.
Now at the Passover feast, he used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. And the one named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the rebels who had committed murder in the revolt. And the crowd went up and began asking Pilate to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. And Pilate answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he was aware that the chief priest had handed him over because of envy.
All right, so thank you, Mark. So what was this occasion or celebration being recognized by the Jewish people at this time in Mark chapter 15? Passover. So what did the occasion or celebration of Passover represent? What were they celebrating? What were they commemorating?
When the death angel passed over.
The death angel passed over the people who had marked their doorposts that lived in Egypt, the Jewish people, and there were some Egyptian people that marked their doorposts, and the Passover angel did not take the firstborn of any of those houses who had marked their doorposts with an X from marked it, however, with the blood of a lamb. So it was commemorating this salvation in Egypt, this exodus that was about to begin from Egypt, the Jewish people's freedom from slavery as such. So what's it tell us had become the custom at this occasion or celebration of Passover at this point in time? They would release one prisoner. In Mark chapter 15, verse 6, it says, at the Passover feast, he, being Pilate, used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. So note that this verse says that they, meaning the people, got to choose the prisoner who would be released. So why do you think this custom would have been initiated of releasing a prisoner? Good. Jill says give a second chance. Certainly they got a second chance, whoever the prisoner was that was released. Stan says perhaps to symbolize freedom from bondage. A lot of people there, Jeff says, so they're trying to appease who did you say, Jeff? Uh, the Jewish people. Again, we're not told, so this is speculation. So I think it's ironic here that this is Passover, and the Jewish people were saved or released from Egypt. So, what's the right word here? Cynically, I think Pilate had initiated this custom of releasing or freeing one prisoner at Passover to, as Jeff said, to appease the Jewish people. So why would Pilate want to appease the Jewish people? Well, we're going to talk about that, Jill. Mark says it's a political stunt to get more approval from the people. And that is true. The background we see here in what had occurred is Pilate was not in good standing with the Jewish people. He was not in good standing with Caesar because under Pilate's leadership, the Jewish people had revolted before because of stuff Pilate did that offended the Jewish people, that offended the Jewish religion. So here, Pilate trying to stay in the good graces as such of the Jewish people, but really trying to stay in the good graces of Caesar so he wouldn't be removed from his office or even worse, put to death. He came, again, I'm speculating, but I think he came up with this plan to appease the Jewish people by offering them to choose a person to be released each Passover. So who in Mark chapter 15, verse 7 is identified as the prisoner that's to be released? Barabbas. And what crimes had Barabbas been actually convicted of? Murder and rebellion or insurrection. Murder and insurrection or rebellion. So Pilate would have been particularly disturbed about an insurrectionist because any sign that Pilate did not control the Jewish people, did not control Jerusalem, that would lead to insurrection, again, would have sent Pilate packing. Caesar would have sent him packing, or, again, even worse, he could have had Pilate killed. So the two highest priorities that Pilate had was to keep order and collect taxes. So by releasing Barabbas, a convicted insurrectionist, a convicted murderer, he was putting in jeopardy both of his top priorities of preventing rebellion, preventing insurrection, and by doing that, that could have put the collection of taxes at risk as well. So what two things do you see that occurred in Mark chapter 15, verse 8? A mob has formed. Yeah, so here we see the mob, and then what was the mob doing? Asking Pilate to do what he had been accustomed to doing, and that is releasing a prisoner. So how did Pilate respond to the crowd or the mob? He asked him first if he wanted to release specifically who, Roger? The King of the Jews. Roger thinks he did that out of spite. Why do you say that, Roger? Jill says he thought he was mocking, and Roger says... Yeah, we'll see later specifically, he does not think Jesus is guilty. So, and I think he was mocking, as Jill said. Who was he mocking? Specifically, who? Yeah, could be. Well, I don't think he wasn't. But who was he mocking? He wouldn't have been mocking himself. Oh, you're talking about Herod. He might have been mocking Herod, but they'd become buddies, it says in another gospel. Who could he be? Who else? Maybe. Who else? Yeah, the chief priest. That's who I think he was mocking, because here, they're saying, our king, if you remember, is Caesar. That's our king. And here, Pilate is saying, let's release the king of the Jews, or Jesus. Second, I think maybe Pilate was trying to favorably influence the crowd. Again, as Roger said, Pilate knows he's not guilty. So he may be trying to influence the crowd to choose Jesus versus Barabbas. That would be self-interest, because he knows Barabbas is a troublemaker, he's a murderer, he's an insurrectionist. So he could be, and he knew Jesus was not really a threat, so he could be trying to direct the crowd in what the response that he wanted. So, well, I just answered the next question, I think. So, what insight had Pilate gained concerning the motive for the charges against Jesus? Look at Mark chapter 15, verse 10. Envy. Mark 15:10 says, Pilate was aware that the chief priests had handed Jesus over because of envy. Again, Pilate recognized that Jesus was innocent, and these charges that the chief priests had brought against Jesus were because they envied Jesus, and we're going to talk about here in just a minute why would they envy Jesus. And then Pilate realized Jesus was being framed. He knew that this was just a made up charges against Jesus. So John MacArthur says the chief priests were envious. Well, let's ask you, why do you think the chief priests were envious? Before I tell you what John MacArthur says, why do you think they were envious of Jesus? Jesus. James says Jesus had so many followers here. Not a week earlier, roughly a week earlier, Jesus had this big parade that all these people were following him into Jerusalem, and the common people were supporting him. The common people really did not support the chief priests. So that's one reason. What else? Stan, I'm going to summarize what he said, but the first part where he said, Stan said that Jesus spoke with authority, and they really did not. They were coming from a place of tradition, and Jesus was coming from a place of really God's Word. So I think the way John MacArthur puts that is Jesus was God, and the priests were not. They wanted to be viewed as, the chief priests wanted to be viewed as gods, put on a pedestal, but the common people, they didn't like them because they were the elite, you might say, in our terms today. So they did not associate or relate well with the common people. John MacArthur goes on to say a couple of other reasons. So Jesus performed miracles, and the chief priests could not. Yeah, jealous. They were jealous of what Jesus had, the relationship with the people, and what he could do versus what they could do. And then, as Stan said, Jesus spoke the truth, and the chief priests did not. Yeah. Ken said they also recognized the temple administration, which were the chief priests, and the scribes were ripping them off because they were overcharging them for their animal sacrifices. They were in their foreign exchange. You had to use Jewish money to buy sacrifices, so the people had Roman currency, so they had to exchange it. So when they exchanged it at exorbitant rates that were ripping off the people, basically. So they knew that. So that's other reasons why the people really were resentful, you might say, of the chief priest and of the temple administration as such. Okay? Anything else there? All right, Martha, if you would read on verses 11 through 14 of chapter 15.
But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. And responding again, Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "Crucify him." But Pilate said to them, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him."
All right, so here we see Pilate asked this question to the people, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" And what did the priest do in response to Pilate's question to the people? What's it say? Stirred up the crowd, so to direct them to have Barabbas released rather than having Jesus released. Barabbas' name means the Son of the Father. The Son of the Father. So isn't it ironic and sad that the chief priests and the crowd at the chief priest's direction were shouting to have the Son of the Father, the law-breaking son of an earthly father, released rather than the sinless, true Son of God, the true, sinless Son, Jesus, of the divine Father, released. How ironic, how sad. Now, if you look in the Gospel of Matthew, we learn something else that was going on during this time that's, I think, quite interesting, that was occurring behind the scenes as such, and that in Matthew chapter 27, verse 19, it says, "And while he was sitting on the judgment seat," that's Pilate, while Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "See that you have nothing to do with this righteous man. For last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." So if Pilate didn't already know that Jesus was innocent, that he was a righteous man, his wife is now basically confirming this to him, that Jesus is a righteous man. So what do you think Pilate should have done with his wife's advice? What's that? Heeded it. Heeded, taken her advice. So Pilate had tried to get out of this dilemma he faced by sending Jesus to Herod for trial. So he tried to pass the buck there, but Herod passed the buck back to him. Pilate here would have been very wise to take his wife's advice. So I think there's a principle here. And the principle is spousal advice is extremely important and should be given the utmost consideration. Spousal advice is extremely important and should be given the utmost consideration. Martha has great insight into the character of people. She can read people very well. She can read people better than I can read people. So taking her advice is usually a very good thing to do. And I've learned over the years, when I don't take her advice, which I don't always, when I don't take her advice, usually it was a bad decision. What's a bad choice? That's exactly right, Kim. It was a bad choice. So again, spouses have different abilities, different capabilities, maybe is a better word, capabilities, and as your partner, as a spousal partner, as a team, depending on each other's strengths, then better decisions, better choices can result. So here, if Pilate had listened to his wife, history in terms of Pilate would have changed, not necessarily in terms of Jesus. Something else would have happened, that he would have ultimately been crucified, sacrificed for the sins of everyone. But Pilate would have been off the hook, you might say. But he failed to listen to his wife's advice. So why do you think Pilate did not take his wife's advice? He's a man. Jill says he's a man. Jill says thinks it could be a pride thing. Very well could be. We're not told, so it could very well be a pride thing that what in that day and time women were not as considered as high of what's the right word here, standing. So he could have been prideful and just said, I know better than some woman. That's possibly the case. Yeah. 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 Yeah, he felt maybe he didn't have a choice. And what was the pride? What emotion? What emotion was the crowd causing in Pilate's life? What emotion was he probably feeling? Fear. Fear is a great motivator. Most often, probably not in the best sense. Sometimes it is. I mean, it's good to be fearful of a lion chasing you. That's a good reason to be fearful. But a lot of times, fear is placed there by Satan, and it generates decisions that are not the best decisions, choices that are not the best choice. Okay, so what do you think the chief priests were doing while Pilate was considering his wife's advice? Pressuring him, could be maybe pressuring him from the other side. What else do you think they might have been doing? Stirring up the mob. They're continuing to stir up this mob and generating more animosity toward Jesus or more favorability toward Barabbas. So I think that's probably what they were taking this opportunity to do, is stir up the mob. So what do you think Pilate's reaction was to the mob's demands? What do you think he was thinking? What's that? Felt like maybe had to keep my peace, yeah. Yeah, had to keep my peace, and so the big mob wouldn't get out of hand. Somebody's going, was that you, Becky? You going to say something, or who was the back here?
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, that he probably didn't want Caesar to find out that there'd been another mob reaction going on.
Yeah, he didn't want Caesar to find out there'd been another riot as such in Jerusalem, because that nearly got him. There had already been a riot that nearly got him. So do you think might have been, here I've got this convicted insurrectionist, this convicted murderer. Here I got this guy over here, Jesus, who had a parade in Jerusalem for him. Do you think he might have been a little bit surprised and confused by what the crowd was, how they were reacting? I think he, he really thought that if I offer up Jesus, surely they're going to take this choice versus this Barabbas, who's just a common criminal as such. So I think he was taken aback, you might say, by the crowd's reaction, the mob's reaction, that they were so intent on having Barabbas released. So Pilate then asked a very important question. What's the question he asked?
What has he done?
Mark 15:12. What's he ask? Yeah. Then it says, "Then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?" What shall I do with Jesus whom you call the King of the Jews? Why is this such an important question? Yeah, it's the most important question each of us will answer. It's an important question for unbelievers. It's an important question for believers. Why is it important for unbelievers, that question, what shall I do with Jesus? Yeah, if Jill says they don't choose him, then it's eternal damnation. So it's a decision of salvation or not for unbelievers. What shall I do with Jesus? What's the decision for? Why is it an important decision for believers? What are we choosing? What's that? Obedience. Obedience. And how we will be obedient. What is our mission? What is our ministry? We as believers are not saved by works, but we're called to works. So what is going to be, we're not saved by works, we're called to ministry, we're called to missions. What's going to be our ministry? What's going to be our mission? How are we going to serve? How are we going to be obedient as believers? So this is a question that every person, believer or unbeliever, has to answer in terms of what will I do with Jesus? Okay? What's the mob's response then to Pilate's question? Crucify him. They shout back at Pilate, crucify him. So how did Pilate respond then to the mob's cries there in Mark chapter 15, verse 14? Yes, it says, Pilate said to him, why, what evil has he done? What evil has Jesus done? Pilate is incredulous. He can't believe the mob is demanding to crucify Jesus and let Barabbas go. He can't fathom that. So because he knows, Pilate knows Jesus is innocent. He knows he's been framed. He knows this is all because the chief priests are envious of Jesus. So then, where did I get to? All right, so Martha, read Mark 15:15, please.
Intent on satisfying the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified.
All right, so what did Pilate then do after the mob cries for Barabbas' release? What did Pilate do to this in response to this reaction of the mob? He releases Barabbas for them. What else does he do? Had Jesus flogged, and then he hands Jesus over to be crucified. So the very first part of Mark chapter 15, what does it say? Why does he do this? Why did Pilate do this? Satisfy the crowd. He was intent on satisfying the crowd. So Pilate was going along with the crowd. He was caving into peer pressure. He was caving into fear. He wanted to satisfy the mob. So what do you think about Pilate's reasoning for handing Jesus over to be crucified? Self-preservation, certainly.
I think he just wanted to get it over with.
Wanted to get it over with. We see later how he responds to that. Jesus says he read the polls. I like that. And he saw where the polls were leading, and he went along with the polls. He went along with the desire of the people. Yeah, the mob itself never, Debbie says the mob itself never gave a reason for why they wanted Jesus crucified. Now, the chief priests had told Pilate that Jesus he committed treason and all this stuff, and Pilate, again, he knew that wasn't true, so he blew that off. But the mob itself, they were just following the leadership of the chief priests. It reminds me way back when in the Wayback Machine that we trained on how to deal with riots. And the first thing part of the training was in dealing with riots is to take out the leaders. Because if you take out the leaders, you take out the chief priests, the mob then dissipates with no leadership. And I think to an extent, you're kind of seeing this, what's going on in Gaza and southern Lebanon, well, all of Lebanon, I guess, they're taking out, Israel's taking out the leadership, hoping that the followers will dissipate. And that's, in a right situation, if you do that, that's typically true. So, but here, Pilate didn't take out the leaders. The chief priests continued to instigate this mob reaction. And I think some truth in the old adage that might makes right. The mob was allowed to have might. And yeah, that's a good point, Mark. And I thought about that. That maybe he did this to get the chief. There's a lot of animosity between the chief priests and Pilate. So maybe he did this again to appease them as much as the mob, to maybe prevent future problems with them, I guess you'd say.
And he'd already made friends with Herod.
He'd already made
Oh,
friends with
that would-
Herod.
that
They
would-
were.
That
They,
would reinforce his relationship with Herod.
Yeah, reinforced his relationship with Herod. Herod and Pilate were rivals because they both wanted to control the whole area, and it had been split up. The geographic area had been split up between Pilate and Herod, and they each wanted to have the other's territory, so they came to be buddies after this with Jesus, from what it says. So this phrase, might makes right, goes back to Middle English, when it says might is right, and it first came about in the 14th century, and it's really an expression that occurred even before that in 340 AD, when it says the advantage of the stronger is just. The advantage of the stronger is just. Might makes right. So, in effect here, Pilate was succumbing to blackmail of the mob. The might of the mob. He was succumbing to the threat that the chief priests had generated by this mob action and so forth. So, and rather than losing his position as governor, if a riot had broken out, he's going to succumb to the threats, the blackmail of the mob. So, he turns Jesus over to be crucified, giving into the might of the mob. So, true or false, compromise is always a good thing. False. Why do you say false? Yeah, some things can't compromise. Jeff said something to that point earlier, a minute ago, that, you remember what you said, Jeff? Jeff spoke to the not to compromise your principles, for us, not to compromise our moral principles, or more importantly, our Christian principles as such. So Pilate compromised here what he knew was right. He knew Jesus was innocent. He knew the chief priests had brought Jesus to this place because they were envious of him. He knew it was not right, but he decided to compromise, let the mob have its way in order to sustain his political position as such. So Pilate tried to have a clear conscience by offering Jesus, to release Jesus and appease the mob as well, but the compromise didn't work because the mob was pushing to have Barabbas released. So Pilate turned a deaf ear to his wife, and he failed there as well. So he knew what was right, the truth, but he gave in to the mob. So the mob might did not make right. There's a quotation, and I'm not sure where this comes from. It says, "Do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons and with the right motives." That's a good quote to live by. Do the right thing at the right time for the right reason with the right motives. And here, Pilate failed to do that. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. That really leads to the next question there. Do you, or the next two or three questions, do you see a foreshadowing or type in the release of Barabbas in lieu of Jesus? If so, what?
Well, I think it's like Mark said.
But these, pull the mic up.
I think it's like Mark said, you know, you kind of just turn a blind eye to things that, you know, maybe you're not willing to fight for.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't want to call anybody bad or what they do bad.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, you
Yeah.
can't.
So go on, Jeff.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the foreshadowing is that this guilty person is freed by the death of Christ.
Yeah. So what's it foreshadow, Jeff? George Soros. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Jeff's giving up on that one. So yeah. But it's foreshadowing each of us are guilty. We're all sinners. It's foreshadowing as sinners we're set free because Christ sacrificed for us. Here, Barabbas, a convicted murderer and treasoner, that's not the right word, insurrectionist, he's set free. The guilty person, as Jeff said, is set free. The innocent person, Jesus, is sacrificed for him. So, again, I just think it's a foreshadowing of what's for all of us, I guess you would say. True or false, that the theory that the majority rules is, the theory that the majority rules is always a good principle to follow. True or false? The theory that the majority rules is always a good principle to follow. I see Debbie, I see a lot of false. So why is that? If so, why is that false? Majority doesn't mean it's always right, Jill said. Correct.
Or if you're just sincere about something, that doesn't make it right.
Yeah, just because you're sincere about something doesn't necessarily make it right. The majority oftentimes is not well informed. They're not discerning. They're not wise. The majority can be influenced or corrupted by unscrupulous leaders. Here we see unscrupulous leaders, these chief priests, they are influencing these people, the majority, the mob, to the exact wrong thing. Picking, choosing Barabbas rather than Jesus. Do you think majority rule in spiritual matters can be particularly risky? If so, why? Or if not, why not? Can be. Why is that, Stan? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great example. Stan said, if you couldn't hear him, that there were 12 spies that went out to scout out the promised land. 10 came back and said, we can't do it. They're big, they're strong, they're mean. We can't overcome those people. But 2, Joshua and Caleb, the minority, came back and said, yes, God is with us, we can do it. But so the majority is wrong. I think particularly in spiritual matters it's particularly risky because if you think about it, we have a democratic rule, typically in the Baptist church or most Baptist churches. And then with that democratic rule, everybody gets a vote. But what can happen is some of those people may not even be believers. They may be immature believers. They may be not spiritually discerning, not spiritually wise, so the majority can come up with a decision that's not the spiritual decision. And the example that came to mind to me is the majority, the influencers, the crowd influence as such, the decision in the Methodist Church to have homosexual ministers. That is unbiblical. But the crowd voted for it. They chose it to have homosexual ministers. So, again, the majority, Stan gave the great example, is not always the correct choice to make, to go with. So, it's incredible here that only in a few days, before this, Jesus was the grand marshal of this huge parade coming in Jerusalem. Now, a few days later, instead of being cheered by all these people as he enters and being the grand marshal of the parade, now this same group of folks, or a lot of the same group of folks, are calling for him to be crucified. So there's an old adage that says the buck stops here. President Truman had that sign on his desk, the buck stops here. And I was curious, where did that come from? And it comes from playing poker in the mid-1800s, where they had buckshot, and they'd pass the buckshot around, and wherever it stopped, that person was the dealer. So the buck stops here. So now you got some trivia for Jeopardy the next time you need that. So anyway, the Pilate here, rather than standing up and trying to do the right thing, he tried to pass the buck. The first time he tried to pass the buck, he tried to send Jesus to Herod and let Herod make the decision. Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. The next time he said, okay, we get to release one prisoner at Passover. Here's Barabbas, this terrible guy. Here's Jesus. I know y'all will choose Jesus. And the mob says, no, we want Barabbas. So that attempt to pass the buck by letting the crowd choose Jesus failed. The third attempt if you notice in that last verse, it said that they flogged him. So I think Pilate there was thinking that if I flog Jesus, and he's been through all this abuse, surely they'll say, well, just let him go now. You have punished him enough, but the people still hollered to crucify him. So Pilate's third attempt at passing the buck failed. So he was ultimately unsuccessful and had to make a choice, an extremely bad choice on his part. So the mob had blackmailed Pilate into a choice to not do the right thing, but to do the expedient thing, to do the, as Jeff said, the political advantageous thing. The adage of power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, was played out in Pilate's choice. Pilate's choice was to risk giving up power by allowing Jesus to be released, or to do the right thing and allowing Jesus' release, or do the right thing and release Jesus. So Pilate chose appeasement, expediency, and retaining power over doing the right thing. So what are the takeaways? What do you take away from today's lesson? Got 1 minute. Yeah, Ken. Let me get this. Here we go.
Okay, John Piper said they should not try to avoid a wounded life, but try to avoid a wasted life. He said, some of you will die because of your allegiance to Jesus. That will not be a tragedy. He said, treasuring life above Christ is a tragedy.
Great. Thank you. That's John Piper quote. We should put that out. So dying for Jesus is not a tragedy, but living a wasted life. That is a tragedy. How true a statement. All right. What other, good point, Ken. Thank you. What other takeaways from today's lesson? We're now into overtime. Focus on truth and knowledge of God's Word rather than emotions. Great point. You know, it may feel good, but it may not be right. Feelings are not necessarily right.
You have
What
to
else?
make up your own mind on things rather than be swayed by the majority or the crowd.
Make up your own mind on things rather than being swayed by the majority of the crowd. Good, Mark. Take the advice from your wife, I think is what Jeff meant to say anyway. What else? All right, here's a few I've got right to close up. Life is about choices. We all face choices. Do you ever choose appeasement, expediency, power, or selfish interest rather than Christ? To Jeff's point, a spouse's wife is extremely important and should be given utmost consideration. Have you answered the question, maybe it is the most important question of, what will you do with Jesus? If so, what is your answer? Have you answered the most important question of what you will do with Jesus? If so, what's your answer? Passing the buck is inviting. However, I think this is what Martha said. However, taking responsibility, regardless of the consequences, is always the best choice. That goes really to John Piper's quote that Ken read as well. So how do you see hope in today's lesson? Jesus. It's always a good answer. Yeah, Stan says Pilate took bad choices, evil choices, but God used them for our good, for His good, in redeeming mankind. Certainly. Thank you, Stan. Excellent. So I had Jesus submitted and took the punishment for Barabbas, just as Jesus substitutes for us and continues to take the punishment we deserve. So we have hope because Jesus did not pass the buck. Jesus could have passed the buck, but He took responsibility as a substitute for our sin. So 3 minutes overtime, sorry. I'm glad you're here today. We'll continue with Mark next week. We'll finish Mark in December and move back to Genesis. Y'all have a blessed week. Thank you for being here.